In 1976, Brit Elders traveled to Switzerland as part of the first investigation of the Billy Meier case. During the 7-year investigation, she and the team analysed and investigated hundreds of UFO photos, witnesses, and consulted different scientific teams on the accuracy and the legitimacy of the different photos and sounds and soil samples taken of the UFO craft that Meier was experiencing. She is the author of the 45th anniversary edition of UFO Contact from the Pleiades. The first volume was published in 1979. And she is here today to discuss Volume 2, where she dives deep into the investigation of the Billy Meier UFO case.
You're listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
Welcome, Brit, back to Exopolitics Today.
Hello, Michael. Good to see you again.
Well, wonderful that we can continue to talk about the Billy Meier case, which has always fascinated me. And it's really great to be able to talk to someone that was part of that detailed first investigation into the Meier case. Now, in our last interview, we focused mainly on Volume 1, where we talked about those many different photos of the beam ships. Volume 2, that was much more of a kind of detailed investigation. So you want to tell us what motivated you to write Volume 2 of UFO Contact from the Pleiades?
We were wrapping up the investigation after 7 years, and we decided that it was probably a good idea to take all of the information we had gathered, put it in a book form, and put it out there for people so that they could make their own decision. The one thing we don't want to do as an investigator, and we definitely avoided it at all costs early on, was saying you have to believe, or this is something that is irrefutable. The best we could do is say all of the evidence supports Meier's claims, but it's up to you to examine the evidence, to look at the images, to look at like the scientists and what they had to say about the metal samples, the movie footage, things like that. And you make the decision as an individual. That makes everything more personal. And it's up to every individual anyway. It's not up to us to say, oh, this is the real deal. The only one that truthfully knows if it's the real deal is Billy Meier. That's it. But the evidence supports everything he said, which makes it a completely remarkable case.
Yes, it truly is a remarkable case. Now, you begin this volume talking about the role of the Pleiades in many ancient cultures and societies that talk about that star system and beings from that star system. And you gave an example of the Yellow Emperor of China, Huang Ti. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right.
Huang Ti.
And apparently he had conversations with beings from the Pleiades who helped him develop advanced technologies for his empire. So you want to talk about the Yellow Emperor?
Yes. One of the things that we came across in our research was Huang Ti had said that beings from the Pleiades came down, showed him very functional forms of agriculture, how to grow rice, how to grow crops in different ways than they had been. So they had a more bountiful harvest, as well as having to use less land, less water, things like that to make these crops. Also, they talked to him about the Great Wall, and they had told him to continue to make certain this stood, because it was a sign of how powerful he was at the time. Many different things. Astronomy came up. But unfortunately, because so much of that information is lost, we just got little nuggets that led us to look into different people and different cultures around the world that found so many unusual things happening related to the Pleiades.
So this Wang Ti, I mean, this is quite amazing. I mean, he reigned around 2700 BC. So that's like getting close to 5,000 years ago that there are these recordings or records of Pleiadians helping human society learn advanced technologies and, as you were saying, agriculture.
Yes. Yes. And to start looking at the stars. That was something that we found interesting because many of these ancient cultures, the Pleiadians actually came in and told them how to create an observatory, what to look for, how to position it so they could get really good information as to the solstices, the equinoxes. And that made a big difference too. And it did to Wang Ti because that all fell in line with their planting seasons and all of that. So the astronomy and the agriculture went hand in hand. And that was true not just in China, but in many of the places that we really got into researching, especially in areas of Africa. Very, very true. In Egypt, it was very true. Just all around the world, Latin America, Mexico. Definitely. Several places aligned to the Pleiades relating to these equinoxes and things like that.
It's very interesting because I lived in Hawaii for 17 years, and Hawaii also has their culture also traces back to the Pleiadians at some point coming over and seeding that civilization.
Right.
And I know that's kind of uniform around the world, but it's very interesting that there are these stories of the Pleiadians coming and helping various cultures, as you said, around the world.
Right.
But the Anunnaki, they were more specific to Mesopotamia. That's very interesting, the difference.
Yes, and the Anunnaki seem to have a different mindset than the Pleiadians and some of the other star groups that we ran into that had a history that had been relayed through the years. Arcturus is one, Sirius is one, even some from Aldebaran. But the Anunnaki seemed to want more control what was happening here and using the individuals. The other groups seemed to want to seed their knowledge into the individuals, the humans that were already living here. I know it's very true with indigenous cultures literally around the world. So many of them say, when we die, we return to our home in the Pleiades. It's so amazing to me because you have all of these huge constellations out there that are visible to the eye. And the Pleiades, when you look up, they're this little tiny, little constellation of stars up there, little grouping. They're so beautiful, though, and your eye is always drawn to them. So I always wondered, why do cultures say that? And then we started learning more and more about how beings from the Pleiadians, star visitors, came in, helped them with knowledge, with education, and then left and said, we were here because you are our little brothers and sisters. Just like they told Billy. Yeah.
So with the Pleiadians, that's precisely the case, that they were much more in this role of being guides and helpers, whereas the Anunnaki, as the records say, that they were here to kind of plunder the resources and establish a slave race to help them. So it's a very important difference. And that kind of seems to run through the whole Billy Meier material, where the Pleiadians are very kind of ethical in their interactions with Billy. Like, they don't read his mind without his permission, and they kind of respect free will. So you want to tell us about those principles of free will and not intruding?
Well, I really appreciated this in the contact notes, and what Billy told us personally is that they believe Earth humans have the right to choice, that our free will supersedes anybody else's input. So if we're willing and open to have an experience of whatever kind, either off-world or on-world, then that's up to us. It's not up to somebody that wants to impose that experience on us. It makes a big difference when you look at how we do things in the world today. In other words, if it's our choice, always, it's our choice whether or not we go to war. It's our choice what we do with the emotions we have, how we react to each other. It's our choice on what we want to share with each other, how we want to treat each other, treat the planet, treat the animals, everything. It makes a big difference when you have that choice, because they told Meier that we are here for lessons. We are here to learn, and we need to learn about the earth and the stars and the other cultures out there. But more than that, we need to learn about ourselves. And that's something that we haven't been doing enough of. That free will, that choice is so invaluable, because not all cultures have it, and we do, because we chose to come in and experience these lessons that we have for ourselves as individuals. It's not like the whole culture has to go through one giant lesson. It's every one of us has our own lessons. And then, because we are all interrelated on this planet, we have the global lessons as well.
And it might be helpful to be more specific here about which Pleiadians we're talking about, because Billy did say that these were beings from the planet Era in the Pleiades star system, that they had this kind of more ethical perspective, and they followed this non-interference principle in Earth's development. But do you know of, and maybe this is from the contact notes, do you know of other groups from those other planets in the Pleiadian star systems that maybe had a different orientation?
And no, I do know of other groups, other individuals that have had contact or claim to have had contact with groups from the Pleiades. Alcyon is mentioned quite often as the sun that this one planet revolves around. I've run into 5 different people that claim to be contactees from South America that relate to Alcyon and that particular star. No others that I've ever spoken to that relate to Era and Taygeta. The people of Era they're quite interesting, according to what Billy has in the contact notes and what he's told us. They have a system of government where, as you're educated, you develop certain skills, and you're naturally drawn into whatever that field is. We've not learned how to do that yet. They are telepathic, so the crime would be minimal. We haven't learned how to do that yet, but we're working on it. They're just different little things, how they care for each other. Not that it's a socialistic or a communistic society per se, because everybody has their individual input, but they are individually self-contained. They have their own little gardens. They raise their own animals. They are there for their family primarily, but should someone need help, they are there for everyone else. They don't have a monetary system like ours. They barter. So if one person, just off the top of my head, has an animal similar to a chicken that has eggs, and they want something from another person that has something else, corn, let's say, and they can swap it out. So they have a bartering system rather than a monetary system. They don't feel that money feeds greed. They do feel that power feeds greed on this planet. They think that money has a value because it can be used as a barter, but they feel that it is something that we have kind of put our value in above everything else out there. And they think that we have a lot of learning and a lot of growth to do in that area.
Well, that's a very interesting, just kind of jumping to that issue of the Pleiadians, at least in that Taygetan star system and era, had no money, that they used a bartering system, and everyone received everything sufficient for their basic needs. Mm-hmm. And as you described, the families are self-sustaining. So, I mean, when we look at that, it sounds very much like a communist society. So I mean, is that what we're talking about here? That the Pleiadians, that they developed to that extent where essentially when we look at the structure of their society, it's like, they have a high-tech society,
Right.
but it's a communist society.
But not really, because it isn't communist where one group makes a determination what everybody else does. What happens when they grow and they go through educational processes, their talents, their specific gifts are really enhanced, and that's what they're focused on. So if in the case of Samyasa, she really had an understanding of space and propulsion and things like that, she would go into that field. Others would go into agriculture. Others would go into cultural situations that they would have on their planet. And it's a matter of choice. It's not a matter of someone dictating to you, you will be a farmer or anything like that. You will produce for these people. No, it's very different than how we would view a communistic society. And they're not all equal. Where I know the point to communism is to take that lower class and make them straight across the board. Everybody's got to be equal. But they all had their gifts, and they were allowed to have these develop and be used in a way that benefited not only themselves, but the other people around them.
Thanks for clarifying that. That is very important.
It is important because we think, oh, it's a great society, they barter and they do all of this, but it still allows the individualism and the choices for that person to move forward in life. And I think that that's really important because you don't see it in a communist and even many socialist societies that sort of squash the creativity and the thought. Creativity is really received well in the Pleiades and specifically on Era. They believe that everybody has a creative spark in them. So whether it's writing, whether it's traveling through space in its own way, has its own creativity to it.
Right. So they don't have that top-down kind of bureaucratic communist like mindset, but they do have various things that are very similar to the kind of communist utopia that Karl Marx talked about in his works.
Yeah. They don't think that we will reach that here on this planet because we're not geared for that. Remember, the Pleiadians had to come in and engineer their planet. They came from Lyra originally, a planet they destroyed. And so they came in and engineered Era so that it could sustain them. That's why everybody had an equal footing right at the beginning. And it's been able to maintain that. But now, here on our planet, no, we don't have that same type of neutral beginning. We have a variety of beginnings that happened all over the planet with all different cultures. There, they only had one culture.
Was Billy Meier told anything about the political structure of Era? Like, did they have a monarchical system? Did they have a democratic system? How was the system of governance there in Era?
My understanding is that it's more democratic. It is a choice where everybody makes the choice. They not necessarily, as we would term it, vote, but it would be something similar where they would make the decisions as to who would be overseeing everything going on. It's also not a situation where they have so many rules as we do and regulations because they are telepathic. So with that telepathy, if somebody steps out of line, everybody knows it. So everybody's more geared toward being basically as good a person as they could be.
Right. Okay. So you're not going to get lying politicians promising the world but delivering very little because telepathically it's like, okay, this guy's trying to sell us a...
They know right away. Yeah.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. So the first 66 contacts were with Semyase, of course, a beautiful Pleiadian female, And then Billy Meier was introduced to Ptah and another male Pleiadian. So what
Quetzal.
role did these male Pleiadians play with Meier, and why did that happen?
They wanted to introduce him to people that were also interested in him, in the reaction of the public and how they were receiving all of this evidence that he was given. They wanted to find out and be able to share more about their cultures, their hierarchy of things. Quetzal was a little higher on the elevation scale than Samyasa and Ptah above Quetzal. But they all were travelers and space travelers. And they were comfortable with Billy because they recognized his past life with them. And they felt that it was something that they could create better communication if it was coming through multiple sources rather than just one. When they began the initial contact with Samyasa, it was because Samyasa was female and men on Earth have less of a hostile issue if they're dealing with a woman than they do if they're dealing with a man. So that's why the contact was initiated with Samyasa.
Quetzal, that's a very interesting name.
Yeah.
The question that arises is, well, is this in some way related to Quetzalcoatl that the South Americans believe played this pivotal role in disseminating wisdom and knowledge and is predicted to come back at this time?
Right. Not specifically that individual Quetzal that Billy's talking to. But yes, the name has a direct connection to what's going on in Mexico with their history and with what's happening now. That's a big deal because the Quetzal bird, this beautiful being, was to come from the Pleiades, and it was considered a spirit bird. And they've got temples and they've got beautiful, beautiful structures all throughout Mexico that are dedicated to Quetzal. Now, Quetzal that Billy Meier is talking to has the name, but it's a name that's traditional. So in the Pleiades, there would be several different Quetzals. And it's quite possible, although I've never talked to Billy about this, it's quite possible that the Quetzal that is being referred to in the ancient histories of Mexico is related to the Quetzal of today.
That's very interesting. And that Quetzal is a popular name in the Aran society there in the Pleiades. Now, the Pleiadians, they revealed themselves to Billy Meier there in Switzerland, and they were very careful in just confining their contacts with him and not having other people involved in that. So what was their concern about open contact? And I know that they were that humanity might panic and steal their craft. So yeah, you want to tell us why they did what they did?
The biggest thing that they were concerned about was the fact that they walk among Earth humans. So you could be running into a Pleiadian out on the street, and they did not want to be recognized. This is why they literally forbade Billy of taking any images of them, of Quetzal, Ptah, or Samyasa, or any of the others that have come in since then. And the reason for that is because they didn't want to get caught walking down the street and have somebody say, "Oh, I saw you." That to them would be very detrimental.
Was told at that time that the Pleiadians actually had operatives or lived amongst us, that they had infiltrated human society, and maybe earlier than 1975, that they were walking and living amongst us, and he was just seeing a small sample
Representative,
of the Pleiadians.
yes. The thing about that is so interesting is the Pleiadians can only be around us for a short period of time. Now, they can go out into public, they can be seen by people because they are dimensional beings like us. They do have to lower their vibration just a bit to be as physical as we are. But the Pleiadians say we have something called auric stench. And that's all of the anger and the fear and the animosity and everything that we hold inside creates an energy around us. And they don't like to be around that. It really makes them literally nauseous. And they talk about this several times in the contact notes with Billy. Billy, they recognize his energy. They have no problem with it. But with other people, they often have a problem because all of this emotion that we carry with us is really rough on them physically. So they can handle maybe 2 hours and then they have to leave.
So this auric stench, I mean, so that means that they could actually see the aura of people and humans
Sense it,
have,
yes.
they carried that violence, that anger,
Yeah.
animosity, aggression, and they could see it, and it's just like, oh, we don't want to have anything to do with these people.
Right. Yeah. Well, we have some of that just walking around the streets of a big city. You'll be next to somebody and say, ooh, I really don't feel good about that person. And you kind of find yourself moving away, or if you're in a crowd in a theater or something. So we react the same way. Theirs is a little more physically violent because they do get nauseous. They do not like the anger, the emotions of frustration and angst and fear primarily that humans do drag around with them. And we haven't learned how to let those things go yet. They have, and that's one of the reasons it affects them so strongly.
I remember there's a book written by Daniel Goleman about emotional intelligence. So I would imagine that the Pleiadians would have a very high emotional intelligence, that they could just feel people's emotions and like, okay, very sensitive and like keep their distance. Interesting.
Right.
Very interesting. Now, in volume 2, there were some images of different beam ships, and there's one showing 4 beam ships that was taken on March 3rd, 1975.
Right.
And so, yeah, you want to tell us about that particular photo he took?
This is 2 of the Variation 2s and 2 drone ships. And the drones are smaller remote controlled craft. The 2 on the bottom are the 21-foot diameter beam ships. The 2 above in that particular image are the 2 drones. And they were just doing a visual display for Billy so that he knew what different types of ships looked like. The Variation 2, that particular ship had a problem. And we found evidence of it later on in the investigation. We brought a group in that had special equipment that could detect various forms of radiation. And we found radiation signatures, very strong signatures, on Billy's belt buckle, on his moped, and even at the very first contact site, which is where Billy first met Samyasa and the craft had landed. Variation 2 was shortly after, I can't remember the exact month, but in 75, towards the end of the year, it was pulled out of commission and they brought in a new one, a Variation 3. And the reason for that was they did not understand and they didn't know what the end relationship would be with the radiation the craft was emitting and the living forms it encountered. So that's something that I think is really important because their understanding of radiation was different than ours.
Helpful to know that these beam ships had different versions. Some were manned and some were autonomous.
Right.
Now, I would assume that the beam ships come from a mothership. Was Billy told about the mothership? Are we talking cigar-shaped craft? Are we?
No, he never gave us a definition for it or what it looked like. But yes, there is one. But these interstellar craft that they have can travel between the Pleiades and Earth. The Pleiades is not that far away when you're looking at space-time travel. And so that was different. And some of the scientists we worked with really could understand it from the standpoint of it would take, the Pleiadians said, 7 hours to get from Era to Earth. They could take 3.5 hours to leave the energy of their planet and that system, and 3.5 hours to enter the energy of our planetary system. What happened in the middle was null time and null space. Time and space ceased to exist. So they were literally jumping from point A to point B. And that's why some of the smaller craft that they brought in were capable of making that jump without going to a mothership.
Well, that's very interesting. That I know in the book, it's described that there were 2 types of propulsion systems. One was a light-emitting device suitable for interplanetary travel, and the second was this hyper-jump drive capable of those long-distance jumps. So I guess
what they called tachyon drive. Yes.
Mm-hmm. So not all ships had that tachyon hyperjump drive, just some of the more advanced ones. And so those more advanced ones could come all the way from the Pleiades, which is 500 light years away, to Earth in 7 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And it was interesting speaking with like H. David Froning, who was an aeronautical engineer that worked with McDonnell Douglas for years on the space plane. Also Alan Holt of NASA, talking about how they had the mathematics to put this together where you would only take that 3.5 hours to exit one area and 3.5 hours to enter a different area. And that middle time was where you made that leap through space. And the Pleiadians called that tachyon drive. What we found was an individual named John McVeigh in Scotland who had written a book on the theory of a tachyon drive and the ability to transit space with literally no time involved, because time and space cease to exist when you're moving at such a space. And time is our creation anyway.
That's fascinating. So this book that you mentioned, discussing tachyon drives, and of course in 1975, Billy Meier is talking about tachyon propulsion systems as part of the Pleiadian craft. So, and tachyons, for those that maybe don't know, these are, scientists regard them as kind of theoretical particles that travel faster than the speed of light, that their minimum speed is the speed of light, but they travel much faster normally, and that impacts time. So that was actually being revealed by Billy and the Pleiadians back in the 1970s as actually functional and being used by the Pleiadians.
Right. And we were so thrilled when we met John McVeigh, who had done all of this research, because he was talking about interstellar travel and how tachyons could make such a difference in where we went with it. But we had to better understand them. And we had to realize at that point in time, for some reason, so many of the physicists that we talked to felt that we were limiting ourselves just to the physics we understood at that moment in time, and that physics is much grander and much more expansive than what we ever imagined. And John was one of those thinkers that said, this is really possible, but we got to get out of our own limitations to get out there and really find out what we can learn about interstellar travel using either tachyons or some form of light-emitting propulsion.
I'm not familiar with John McVeigh. Did he get those ideas from Billy Meier, or did he arrive at that independently?
He wrote his book in 1976, and he knew nothing about Billy Meier. He had been working on this theory for about 10 years before we met him.
That's fascinating. So you have around the same time a scientist coming up with the kind of theoretical plausibility of tachyon drive propulsion systems, and here's Billy Meier talking about, well, the Pleiadians use that, and it takes them 7 hours to travel 500 light years. I mean, that's more than synchronicity. It's like, well, maybe the Pleiadians were influencing John McVeigh.
We wondered about that. We had, in fact, we asked John, do you have unusual dreams about traveling in space? Have you ever had an encounter? All different types of things, because the happenstance of that, of us finding the book and then connecting with John and what Billy had said, and the timing of it was just so perfect. It was definitely synchronicity at work.
Well, for those that are interested in finding that book by John McVeigh, could you just spell his second name?
Yes, it's McVey.
John McVeigh. Okay, well, that is definitely on my reading list. I need to take a look at that, because I think that's amazing, and I think often probably that is what happens. You have contactees, and then you also have scientists being influenced at the same time to come up with these. Well, the contactees are reporting on their experiences, and scientists are following theories and hypotheses and arrive at that. Fascinating.
I think that happens quite often, maybe more often than we recognize, that something that's going on in the world, especially when it comes to unseen phenomena, unseen realities, suddenly kicks in with the scientific mind. And if people are open to it, I'm sure you know in your work and your research, the transference of thought isn't so far off, and isn't one of those strange woo-woo topics that people want to attach to it. And I think that a thought from an extraterrestrial wouldn't be any different than receiving a thought from an individual.
Yes, very true. So you met Billy, I guess, in 1976?
Yeah.
In 76, and so he was sharing his photos, his videos, and evidence, and he was doing that with a lot of people. And apparently in 77, he, I guess, didn't follow the advice of the Pleiadians in regarding the handling and the distribution of those photos and videos, and that led to him experiencing some kind of personal problems with the owner of the property where he was staying, and so he lost his home and had to start over again in a different place. So, what happened at that period?
He was being, first of all, to understand Billy, he's a very trusting man. And he was, especially back then, extremely trusting. People would come in and say, oh, let me have the negatives and I'll go get them duplicated for you, and then never show up, never bring the negatives back. And the Pleiadians had warned him to be careful and to protect this, because there would be a time when they would refuse to give him any more physical documentation. The individual that was processing the film for him had turned over some negatives to some other people, and they shouldn't have. And so there was a break in that relationship. Billy was not trusting him. It was just one of those sort of, it happens in everybody's life. You run into someone that doesn't do what they say they're going to do. We found this with two of the individuals that processed his film, that they duplicated the slides and they sold them, and they didn't tell Billy what they were doing. It was a rough time, and the Pleiadians pulled back from Billy for a little bit and said, you have to reevaluate what we are allowing you to have. And they were allowing it because they were posing their craft for him to take pictures of, and what you do with it. And he explained that to us when we talked to him, and he said, but here is all the evidence. And he literally gave us everything. He gave us photographs. He gave us, we have the internegs of the photographs. We had movie footage. We had metal samples, audio recordings, whatever we needed, he gave to us. But he knew that we were going to have it all analyzed, and that It wasn't something that we were running off to say, oh, look what I have, and, make it a personal situation that way. And apparently the Pleiadeans had told him that it was all right, given him permission to give us this documentation, this physical evidence, so we could have it analyzed. And he was very open with us. He just said, here it is. It's yours. Take it. And his big thing was, let me know what the scientists have to say about it. So that was his only prerequisite.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you got a lot of the original photos, videos,
as close to the original as we could get. Yes.
Okay. All right. So yeah, that's very interesting that the Pleiadeans cut off the giving him physical evidence or kind of like allowing their craft to be photographed after. I mean, it's mentioned that there'd been 800 photos and videos taken, and then it was, I guess, in 1976 that break happened, that they said, okay, no more photos. But
then they changed their mind, and he was allowed to take other photographs after that. They saw that he was, unhappy with what was going on, and he was more protective of the documentation that he was given. So they allowed more photographs, more movie footage. All of that happened, but there was a time when he said, we need more. And the Pleiadeans said, how much more do you need? Really, how much more do you need? And they cut everything off. Yeah.
Right. So at that time, and I guess, from the very beginning, from 1975, so Billy Meier was having all of these contacts and typing up those experiences, and they became the contact notes.
Right.
And I know there's like several volumes have been published and translated into English. How many volumes are there of the contact notes?
I think we ended up doing 5. It was Wendelle Stevens and Genesis 3 Publishing that put them out there. Our company, Genesis 3. But yeah, I think there were a total of 5 that came out eventually. But in no way did they cover the entire expanse of contact notes. Billy's still having contact. His office is full of these journals that contain the contact notes and all the experiences that he had. And what happens is he would have a contact with Samyatsa Quetzalcoatl, come back, and it would all be right there, and he would write it down word for word, and then it would be put into a journal that he could reference at a later date.
So for people that haven't read any of the Billy Meier contact notes, how important are they?
Wow. There are parts of the contact notes that I find personally, and it reacts to every individual differently. Personally, I find them very beautiful, very spiritual, very connecting. There are parts of them that have no bearing on my life whatsoever. There are parts that are very informative about what happens in the Pleiades, how they got there, what happened on Lyra, what they don't want to see us go through, things like that. But to me, the spiritual side of the contact notes was really quite beautiful. And it was talking about connection to creation, not necessarily a God force, as we think of God in terms of being a personified human, but creation, existing in all things, and how a spiritually developing person creates his own luck. That was one of my favorite passages, because you're centered in yourself and you're in harmony with self. Those types of things really struck me as being extremely important and valuable. But then there were parts about what was going on with the world that had no bearing and changed overnight. Some things seemed prophetic, definitely. Lee and I experienced that. We were in Switzerland with Shirley MacLaine. We took her over there to meet Meier while she was riding out on a limb. And as we were dropping her off at the airport, we heard that Anwar Sadat, had been assassinated. The initial newscast said it was one individual and it was in his palace. And they shut down all information at that point. Shirley got off the ground, luckily, because they closed the airport right after that, too. And we got back to the farm, and Billy says, well, what they said isn't correct. And he went and got the contact notes and brought them out and went right to the page, and he says, this is what happened. Sadat was assassinated in a military parade. So we had one set of information given to us by the news. Billy told us another set of information. And we didn't hear about this on the news until the next day, that it was during a military parade that he was killed.
That's very interesting. So that's a powerful corroboration.
Yes.
That the initial news reports got it wrong, and that Billy Meier's contact notes described what was going to happen to Anwar Sadat, and it happened.
Yes.
And apparently the same, Meyer also predicted the death of Yugoslavia's president, Joseph Tito. So, yeah, what did he say about Tito?
He did not say when he would die. There was a little tiny passage in the contact notes that said Tito would be passing shortly. And it wasn't a reference to an exact date, but this was in 78, I believe that was said. And it referenced right into that. There were so many different little things. He talked to Lee and I extensively about the 33-day Pope, and before he died, and told us there will be a Pope that will last 33 days, and then you will have a new Pope. And that was from the contact notes. Oh, many, many different things that were coming up there in our discussions. And it's something that the Pleiadeans view it this way. They don't say they are fortune tellers or futuristic visionaries. They say if you have event A and event B, event C will happen. They have what they call an event clock.
Yes.
So the event clock is what determines how things unfold. They can basically follow what happens from, let's just say with Sadat, that there was the meeting and he was called the man of peace, and there was this meeting and he was going to bring peace to the Middle East. That happened. And then there were other issues that happened in his own country, and then the assassination. So they saw point A, point B equals point C. And that's how they went through and viewed their timeline of events. So they couldn't say, on this day, at this time, this will happen. But they could say, if this happens and this happens, this will happen. And that was their event clock.
Well, I am familiar with some of the prophecies of the Billy Meier case. I know I got to spend a bit of time with Colonel Wendelle Stevens.
Uh-huh.
And he was a big fan of the contact notes and of the prophecies. I mean, he seemed to feel that made what Meier was experiencing rock solid, that these predictions turned out. And he said that there were also personal predictions that Meier was given that also turned out. So he was a big proponent of the Meier case. And so I guess the question is, if we go back and read these contact notes going all the way back to 1975, will there be a lot of information about what we are experiencing right now in the world and in the United States?
Not so much from 1975, but I believe through the future contact notes that have not been released, there will be information there. And yes, Billy received a lot of personal information. Several times it saved his life, because when we wrapped the investigation in 1982, Billy had already had 33 attempts on his life. He had been told of one specific attempt and told to make a metal plate that he could wear underneath his shirt, and it would save his life, and it did. He was also told of another time when someone would take a shot at him, and Wendelle Stevens would be sitting right next to him. And the bullet went right into the barn door. They were sitting on a couch in front of the barn, and the bullet went right between them, right into the barn door. We dug it out, had it examined. But many times they have given him the knowledge that he needed to basically save himself, also save his children. And so that's been beneficial to him personally. But there are many things, like they talked about the ozone in the atmosphere, and the ozone hole was expanding in 1975. They were quite concerned about it. They said if you get rid of the gases that are used as propellants, you'll find that the ozone will go back to normal, and it will contract and expand, but it will not be on a course to really expand to the point that it lets in very dangerous atmospheric elements. So that's what Jaime got involved with. He went to the North Pole and to the South Pole, and he checked all of this out, and he found out that the ozone hole was moving and was changing. That's how he got involved with the Meier case, was through that little piece of information. And he's very involved. This is Jaime Maussan, and he's very involved with the environment and environmental causes. And he thought this one was really worthwhile. And of course it was, because we started taking the propellants out of things like hairspray and things like that at that point. That really saved a lot of issues that we could have faced with the ozone.
Now, you mentioned that Billy Meier started to get was able to take photographs again after the Pleiadeans had stopped that for a few years. So in 1976, he takes this photo of in 1981, March of 1981, it takes the photo. I can't remember the name of it. Is it the Christmas cake? UFO?
The wedding cake.
The wedding cake, yes, the wedding cake.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll put that image up for you.
It is a very strange ship. It looks like it has little pop beads all around the top of it, that you played with when you were kids. But it is an unusual ship. However, it had some unusual qualities to it, too, that we were able to examine in depth. And that was the audio. The sound of the craft was so unique. And we took it to an individual who was with the Naval Lab in Groton, Connecticut, where they store all the sounds. He couldn't find anything at all that correlated to that particular craft. It wasn't a lawnmower. It wasn't a motor of any kind as we know it. All of these different things, he could not compare it to anything else. Then we went to Boeing Labs, and we were working with an audio engineer, and he literally, without seeing this image, went through the recording, all the frequency changes it was making, and he started drawing these little circles. Well, you have a circle here and a circle here, and then you expand it, it goes across this way, and you add two more, and it's the frequencies. And at the end of all of this happening, he says, the only thing this could be for is propulsion. And this was one of the ships that Billy said had the capability of going between Earth and the Pleiades without a stopover anywhere.
So we do have an example of the beam ship sound from one of Meier's craft. I don't know if this is from that March 1981 craft, but we have it. So it goes for about 35 seconds. So yeah. Jazz, if you want to play that for us, and then Brit, you can tell us what that is.
Okay.
We can't hear anything, Jazz. Still can't hear anything. So yeah, I don't know what is that.
That one was a recording of the beam ship you have up there, that variation that you have on the screen right now. And in the background, we never could compare it to any other engine or any other type of sound that was in the sound banks. But you could hear a siren of a European police car. You could hear a dog barking. You could hear a bird cawing. That could all be heard on this tape. That tape was particularly interesting because in it, you could also hear a vehicle in the distance. And underneath that little area, though, at Hassenbowl, is a road. And there were vehicles traveling back and forth on the road. Billy took still photographs and movie footage that day, as well as got the recordings from the craft itself.
Okay, and the kind of scientific analysis of those sounds.
Yes, that was really something because Steve Ambrose, who was Stevie Wonder's audio engineer, Nils Ragnerud, who is another audio engineer, great guy, they took these and they broke them down as far as they could break down all the tones and frequencies they were hearing. And what was happening is the frequencies, since you just heard, expand and then they contract, almost like they all merge into one, and then they expand again, but at a different level. They also found that the Schumann resonance of the Earth, that frequency, was present in all of the recordings that Meier made of the craft. So that was intriguing. But when we asked all of the engineers that worked on this, all of the audio engineers, how would you duplicate it? Steve Ambrose said, I think if we took all of the synthesizers we had and we put them all together, we still couldn't duplicate this. We said, what do you think it's for? Nobody had any idea other than maybe it's residual from their propulsion. That's the only thing that made any sense. So we couldn't make it at that time, even with all of the great technology that we had, or we thought we had. It's improved since then. And it didn't make sense other than it was something for propulsion, which Billy confirmed in conversations with us. But they had the ability to cloak the sound as well as cloak the ship. So you couldn't necessarily hear or see the ship if you were an outsider looking in.
Well, I know there is this science called cymatics, where you play a sound and sand and particles can form themselves into complex geometric patterns based on different frequencies. So cymatics is known to produce that effect. So it to me, it's not a stretch of the imagination to say that the sounds can also impact or have an effect on something like space-time around an object, and that could influence propulsion.
Mm-hmm. Most definitely. Yeah, that's something we didn't do because it wasn't around at the time. But that would be fun to see what type of reaction the Earth would have, sand would have, to these frequencies that are being played. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that would be fascinating. Now, one of the and you already kind of mentioned a little bit about this, but I noticed, this is fascinating, that the beam ships give off gamma rays, a lot of gamma rays, and those gamma rays could be detected far above the normal background. So you want to tell us about the kind of investigation that looked at gamma ray activity or residue around the Meier property?
Mm-hmm. We brought in Wild Herberg, and we took them all around the property. We took them to the contact sites. The first contact site from 1975, and this was in 1982 when we were working with them. But the first contact site from 1975 pegged the meter with gamma radiation. Billy's belt buckle, his moped, the tractor. There's an area beneath the farm where there had been a ship that had landed, and this was back in the early part of 76, I believe, and it left a big footprint landing track there in this field. It was hot. Our concern was, with all of this gamma radiation, how does it affect the human body? Because Billy had been exposed to it time and time and time again. And we found out that gamma radiation can really do some damage to the body when it is a perpetual experience, I guess you would say, that it can affect the inner organs, the internal organs. It can affect the brain. It can affect the blood. It can affect so many different things. And it was shortly after that Billy was in the house. This was 81, 82. As we were learning more about the gamma rays and what they could cause, Billy passed out in the bathroom, hit his head, took a really serious fall. And some of the doctors that we had talked to said it's very possibly caused by all of this gamma radiation that he had experienced way back in 1975, because they took that craft out of service and brought new craft in because of the gamma radiation. So this was something that was still affecting him years later.
Well, that's very significant that the Pleiadians were still experimenting at that time with the gamma ray activity being emitted from their craft, and how that was harmful to the environment and presumably to the crew too.
Yeah, well, no. This is what's so intriguing, because the Pleiadians are at a slightly different vibration than we Earth humans are. So their vibration is a little higher. That gamma radiation may not affect them the way it would affect us. And they may not have been fully aware, which we don't believe they were, since they took the craft out of service when they detected an issue. The gamma radiation would affect us. Going back to the fact that they had to engineer their planet, they might not have the same reaction to gamma rays as we would have. And that's something that we've never gotten a real clear answer from them on, but it is something that I think is worth pursuing more and more with Billy and his contacts, to find out, were they even aware that gamma radiation would affect living things and would maintain such residual energy for such a long period of time?
Well, this is a question that's kind of like been raised by quite a few people over the years about Billy Meier's contacts with extraterrestrials. And some people have seen a similarity between the craft that Meier was photographing and some of the alleged Hannibal craft that had been developed by Germany during the Second World War, presumably afterwards, during the kind of retreat and setting up a breakaway society and so forth. So I mean, is there any plausibility that there's some relationship? And of course, the Pleiadians spoke to Billy in fluent German. So could there be this possibility that some of the Pleiadian contacts involve these Germans or connected with the Germans?
That's a really good question, and one I have never gotten an answer to. However, I will say this. When Billy was 5 years old, he saw his first craft, and it was similar to a Variation 2 type craft, similar to the ones you have up there now on the screen, but not exact. And none of his craft are exact compared to what you have up there on the screen. None of the ones that he photographed anyway. So back in 1940, whatever it was, that he saw his first craft at the age of 5. This is something that, was it what his father said? This is a Nazi airplane, a new Nazi air machine, or was it something from the Pleiades? Were the Pleiades influencing the design of the ship? Or were the Nazis seeing these craft and using that design to create their own? It's hard to say, and I don't have a defined answer on that.
So, but that's interesting that you mentioned Billy Myers had that first sighting in 1945, and his father thought that this could have
Yeah.
been part of the German space program.
Yes, he asked his dad, "What is that?" Because he turned around and he saw this big craft, and his dad said, "That's part of Hitler's military. It's part of their airship program."
That's interesting because I know it was confirmed in 1952 by Giuseppe Belluzzo, an Italian engineer and politician, and also Rudolf Schreiber, a German scientist, that Germany and Italy during the war were working on flying saucer programs. So Billy Meier's father knew about this, being a Swiss German.
Well, I think it was an assumption on his part that that's what it had to be, that it couldn't be anything but that. So that was, to me, I think it was more his dad making that assumption.
I mean, it's very interesting for me because I've been very interested in the role of Alan Dulles, the former director of the CIA, and because during the Second World War, he was based, I believe it was in Basel, Switzerland, and he was the guy that was making deals with the Germans. So if the Germans were working on a flying saucer program, he would have been the one that would have made deals with the Germans about what to share and what they could take. And it's a very interesting case to pursue.
Yeah, it is. And to get a very definitive answer from, which has not been given as of this point that I'm aware of.
Right. Well, I want to move on now to the general reaction to the scientific community to the Billy Meier case, because I mean, you found and you've shown in UFO Contact from the Pleiades, in both volumes, an enormous amount of scientific data showing that this case is genuine, that the evidence is pretty persuasive, but not just scientists, but also many people within the UFO community didn't even look at the Meier case, and you described how they labeled it as a repeater case, which made it something that was unreliable. So why does organizations like MUFON take that position?
Well, I think they've changed over the years, but back in 75, what happened was they were aware of Betty and Barney Hill. Travis Walton was having his experience in that same time frame. These were abductions. This is what we were accustomed to. There had not been a contact case that was a cognizant discussion between universal beings and an Earth human that we were aware of that was continuing over a period of time. And it was just too much, really too much. And then when you had all this evidence, oh my gosh, well, it just became, I don't even want to look at it. I don't want to talk to it. That was the big thing. They just didn't want to address it at all. And that's what happened with a lot of the early groups that were involved. APRO was different. APRO initially really got behind the Meier case because they were in Tucson, close to Wendelle, close to us. We were in Phoenix. We had meetings with them. They saw the number of photographs, the movie footage. We even showed them the medal. This is the Lorenzens, Jim and his wife. And we shared all that with them. We showed them what we had to work with and told them where we were going. So they got behind it in the beginning. As far as the scientists, though, Michael, it was 50% of them were really curious on a personal level, but they did not want to risk their reputations. The other 50% just thought it was nuts, period. They didn't want to take it anywhere at all. The 50% that were curious, they were terrific. None of them would say, this is a UFO. They just couldn't bring themselves to that. But they could say, we cannot duplicate this. We cannot make it ourselves. We cannot take this photograph and have it look nearly as good, because it's going to require some type of special effect. We cannot duplicate the metal. We cannot duplicate the sound. So when you take this huge compilation of all of this physical evidence, it's mind-boggling to many, many people. And the scientists were no different. All they could do is say, I can't duplicate it, but I don't know what it is. And they let it go at that.
So, I mean, the Meier case happened nearly 50 years ago, and of course there's this tremendous pool of data, and you have documented that in volumes 1 and 2 of UFO Contact from the Pleiades.
Right.
And of course this 45th anniversary edition is something that every serious researcher should get for their library, because I think it's wonderful. I mean, those beautiful color photographs of all of the craft. So does that mean that the Meier case today can actually take off, as opposed to in the 70s when, you know, people, scientists especially, just weren't ready for this information?
You know, I think this is true. I think the timing of it is perfect now. It was ahead of its time back in 1975. And the reason I say that is, looking back at it, we didn't have the computers, we didn't have the technology we have today to create an incredible image. We didn't have Photoshop back then. Nobody had personal computers in their home. We didn't have telephones that could take amazing photographs. This is all old school evidence. And we really had to work to find the technology that could catch us up to analyzing it, which was interesting. But, you know, it's all changed now. Now we could duplicate these images. Back then we couldn't. People realize that, and it makes a big difference on how they respond to the case itself.
Well, I know now there's a tremendous kind of growth in public interest. The US Congress is getting involved.
Right.
Organizations are being set up. They're interviewing whistleblowers. But still, there's silence when it comes to contactees. And that's puzzling to me, because I thought, well, you know, why is the scientific community and the political community so interested in the ships and will go to extraordinary efforts to analyze the ships, but yet people have face-to-face encounters with the pilots of the ships, and they just scientific community and just dismiss all of that. And it's like,
baby steps, Michael, baby steps.
Right. So,
unfortunately, I think that's what it is. Okay, now we can look at evidence, but to have a conversation with an off-world universal being, wow, that's too much to really ask or explain or try to understand. It really shouldn't be. We really should be moving forward with all we're doing so that we're more receptive to that type of communication. We could learn so much more if we listened. Yeah.
So where does Billy Meier stand today on this? I mean, is he still doing interviews? Because I don't hear very much about him. I mean, at all. I haven't seen any interview with him. So does he allow investigators and researchers to come and see him?
He sends them to us. He because we did the work, you know, when everything was actually happening. Billy's not interested in publicity. He's not interested in sitting down for interviews. He talks to me. We communicate on one level, either Zoom or email or something going on, usually once or twice a week, just to stay in touch. He's 87 years old. He knows what's going on. He knows the book is out. He knows we brought the documentary out that we made in 82. He's really happy to see those now coming back out. He's still Billy that I knew back in the day, back in the 70s and the early 80s. He's just a gentle, kind, curious man. And he doesn't have any interest in getting out there and doing any publicity or anything like that for what's happened to him. He thinks people need to just research, do their own reading, their own studying, and make their own decisions.
Okay, so if any investigators are interested in finding out more about the Billy Meier case, they really need to start with your book, UFO Contact from the Pleiades, and get in touch with you.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. The documentary film has more information. It was made in 1982. It sort of wrapped up little bits and pieces that were out there. We actually made a model of the craft and did the photogrammetric analysis of the model and of the ships that Billy photographed so that people could see what we were seeing. So we did things like that, and we had a lot of lengthy conversations with Meier. We did a psychological stress evaluation with him, which is similar to a lie detector test. That's all in the documentary. It's the same name, UFO Contact from the Pleiades. It's just something that it adds more visual to what the investigation was actually about. We packed volume 1 and volume 2 with photographs and with images from the investigation, as well as a lot of text. It's a 200-page book, so it's got a lot of good text and a lot of good information in it. And what we couldn't do, we picked up in 1982 with that documentary.
Well, I know you consulted a lot of experts on the various aspects of the evidence Billy Meier had, and one of those was Dr. Marcel Vogel, who looked at one of the metal samples from the Bean ships, and he said, and I'll just kind of read out what you cited, was, quote, "Now we, with any technology that I know of, could not achieve this on the Earth plane, on this Earth plane. It is very exciting. You get specimens like these and have the opportunity of looking at and examining them. It does not look like anything that we've made here." So that was Marcel Vogel. So you want to tell us his reaction to this kind of metal sample?
Yes, he had, Marcel had quite the pedigree. He had a lot of patents. He worked for IBM. He was blown away because primarily the metal had thulium in it. Thulium is a rare earth element, very difficult to extract, very costly to extract. So that was the primary thing. But there was also crystalline structure in the metal that he found fascinating because the birefringence separated sections of metal. He couldn't believe it when he had it under the scanning electron microscope. I was saying, what? I've got the audio of it. He's just in shock seeing this. I don't understand it. How could it be made? He said it would take a cold fusion process, which we didn't have access to at that time. And that's why he said it couldn't be made here.
So this metal sample that he had and tested and made this preliminary conclusion was something that he was going to take for further metal analysis, and then it disappeared. So what happened there?
Well, he had folded up a little piece of paper and put it in his pocket, and inside that paper was the metal. He got on a plane, and when he got off the plane, the metal was no longer in the little piece of paper. He said he did not know what happened to it. That was really unusual. Now, he had brought in all of these different, over 40 scientists from places like Ames Research to help him understand what this metal was and how it was put together. None of them believed that we could duplicate it at that point in time on this planet. But where that metal went, I have no idea.
Okay. And of course there was a lot of analysis of the photos. I mean, those are kind of like, I guess, the primary way that people can experience or see what Meier was encountering, and the analysts found no evidence of hoaxing, that these images were pretty authentic. Right.
We had them at, well, Dr. Michael Malin, who's very involved with the various Mars projects that NASA's had going on. He was at U of A, and he did a lot of the digitizing work on the images. They were at places like Scripps. They were at places like JPL. Robert Post, the head of the photo lab there at JPL, took a look at them He said he didn't know what it was, but it was something that he couldn't make. Um, we had them all over the place talking to various specialists because we weren't. We knew we had to bring in people that knew what to do with photogrammetrics. Jim De La Tosa was one of the first that got involved and could show us with a digitized image from Dr. Malin that, the craft's edges showed that it had a certain depth. And when you compared it to a tree that was right next to it, or you had the distance where you could triangulate size, you found out the craft was 21 feet in diameter, which pretty well ruled out a model. You would have to be suspended by a crane. Yeah.
Yes, so these analyses of the photos, and we do have one there. I don't know if Jazz, if you want to put that up. This kind of like was one of the examples that of the kind of rigorous photographic analysis that the experts were doing. Okay, there we go. So I don't know if you can explain what's happening here with this kind of analysis.
What they were doing with the color contrast, what happened with so many of the objects, see that red up above it? That appeared to be like a field that went all the way around it. And that was so interesting to, especially De La Tosa, who was working in this area, of taking the object and then assigning a color to different frequencies that they were finding in the image. That red went all the way around it. In one particular photograph, I believe it was taken in April of 1976. It was of a fighter, a jet, in the same frame as one of the objects that Meier photographed, one of the unknowns. And when we ran it through this type of analysis, this red line went all the way around both the craft and the jet fighter. And it was just remarkable to be able to see that. So this is like an energy field. I think that's the simplest way to describe it, that appears in 90% of the images that Meier took, that we had digitized and analyzed this way.
Now, the Meier case is still ongoing, and you ended your 7-year investigation, I guess, in 1982, 83.
Right.
So after that, did you explore other contactee cases?
Yeah, we did. We found some down in South America that were very interesting. None of them had the evidence, the physical evidence that Meier had, but they all had wonderful dialogues back and forth between these beings and the people. So we got into that a little bit. And then in 1981, Jaime Maussan brought us into the Mexico flap that was going on down there. During the eclipse of June 91, there was an object photographed at the same time the eclipse was taking place. And it was photographed from all around Mexico City. And it was kind of, I guess what we'd call today the hockey puck. It was more little square with a flat bottom on it, not a disc type ship. And Jaime tracked us down and he brought us into Mexico and said, "What do you think?" And that was the beginning of a very long, ongoing investigation, because even though not many people were claiming to have contact down there, the sightings were phenomenal. They had fleets of these things going over the skies of Mexico. The people would be, well, on January 1st, 1993, was one of the biggest sightings, and people literally got out of their cars on Reforma, which is the longest road going through Mexico City, leaned back on the hoods and watched the UFOs go overhead. And it was something like what you have on the screen there. It was literally a fleet of objects. We used to bring film crews in from Japan. We brought sightings down there several times. Always, we go to a place called Casita Blanca outside of a little town called Atlisco. Not so little, 100,000 people. And everybody went to Casita Blanca to watch the UFOs come in. And it turned into a party. They would grab grandma, grandpa, the kids, the dog, the beer cooler, the chase lounges, and up the hill they'd go to watch UFOs. They knew they were coming in. They were fine. They're not afraid. There's a different mindset in Mexico. That sighting that took place on January 1st in 1993 was the front page of the papers the next day. It was on the 6 o'clock news that night. Nobody was saying, oh, this is just mylar balloons or something like that. They were all discussing what it could really mean. Tremendous things happening in Mexico, still going on. A few individuals attempting to have contact down there. We ran into a couple of abduction cases while we were there. Nothing like the Meier case, but nonetheless something we can all learn from. And it was quite an experience for all that was going on in Mexico at that time. We had pilots reporting things. We were working with air traffic controllers who were seeing things on radar that suddenly vanished. And they'd say, where did it go? All different types of things like that, working with doctors, with the university. Just so much happening down there, and it's still going on. They're still having these types of sightings. The people of Mexico accept it. They're not afraid of it. They're curious about it. But now it's becoming normal. And so they're not so involved in photographing it anymore.
Well, I would love to have you back to talk about the UFO sightings in Mexico and all of these amazing photos that I've seen over the years.
To. And I'll send you some videos so you have an idea. I mean, we have over 10,000 video recordings from people of different things in Mexico. It's quite remarkable. But I'll send you some videos that Lee and I put together, and you'll have an idea of what's been going on down there.
Wonderful. Okay, so just to finish up, where do people go to get the 45th anniversary edition of UFO Contact from the Pleiades, and if they want to watch the film?
And they can get both the book and the documentary at Amazon. If they want to stream the film, they can do it at Vimeo or through Beyond Words Publishing. And the book is available everywhere now, which is great, and it's being received very well, which is a nice change from 1975.
Well, I want to thank you, Brit, for being on Exopolitics today and giving us such a rich, detailed, informational look at the Billy Meier case.
Oh, thank you, Michael. It has been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
You have been listening to Exopolitics today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.